Hinterkaifeck, the killer who stayed behind. On the afternoon of April 4th, 1922, 3 men walked toward an isolated farmstead in Bavaria. For days, no one had seen the family who lived there. The little girl had not been to school. The family had missed church. Mail was beginning to pile up. A mechanic had come to repair an engine and found no one, but he had still done his work and left. From the outside, the farm did not look abandoned. The animals had not been left entirely untended. Smoke had been reportedly seen from the chimney. Something about the place still seemed active. But inside the farmstead of Hinterkaifeck, 6 people were dead. The first bodies were found in the barn. Andreas Gruber, 63. His wife, Cäzilia Gruber, 72. Their daughter, Viktoria Gabriel, 35. And Victoria's daughter, 7-year-old Cäzilia Gabriel. Inside the living quarters, the searchers found 2 more victims. 2.5-year-old Josef Gruber, and the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 45. Maria had arrived at Hinterkaifeck only mere hours before the murders. The killer was never caught. Hinterkaifeck was not a village. It was a single farmstead near the Bavarian hamlet of Kaifeck, roughly 70 kilometers north of Munich. The name means something like behind Kaifeck, and that is more or less what it was. A farm set back from ordinary village life, bordered by woods, fields, and distance. The farm was built around 1863. By 1922, it belonged to the Gruber household. Andreas Gruber was the head of the family. He was a farmer, known locally and not always remembered kindly. Accounts describe him as hard, controlling, and unpleasant. His elderly wife, Cäzilia, lived there with him, along with their daughter Viktoria, a widow whose husband, Karl Gabriel, had been reported killed in the First World War. Viktoria had 2 children living with her, Cäzilia and Josef. Joseph's legal name was Gruber, not Gabriel. That matters because his paternity was one of the major tensions surrounding the family. Viktoria was unmarried when Joseph was born, and the identity of his father became one of the ugliest questions around Hinterkaifeck. The family's reputation was already troubled. In 1915, Andreas Gruber and his daughter Viktoria had been convicted of incest. Years later, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a nearby farmer who had reportedly had a relationship with Viktoria, made accusations connected to Joseph's paternity. Schlittenbauer would later become the most discussed suspect in the case. So before the murders, Hinterkaifeck was already a place surrounded by tension. There was family scandal, there was money, there was possible paternity, and then, in the weeks and days before the murders, the household began noticing strange things. The best-known detail is the footprints. Andreas reportedly found tracks in the snow leading from the woods toward the farm, but no tracks leading back. Around the same period, a Munich newspaper appeared on the property that no one in the household had bought. A house key had gone missing. There were reports of noises from the attic. The previous maid, Crescens Rieger, had left the farm the year before, later saying she believed the house was haunted. There were also later reports of more specific signs inside the building, disturbed areas in the attic, places in the hay where someone may have lain, and roof tiles shifted in a way that could have allowed someone to watch the farmyard. Those details have become part of the legend of Hinterkaifeck. They do not solve the case, of course, but they do matter because they suggest that someone may have been near the property, or even inside it, prior to the murders. Maybe someone was watching the farm. Maybe someone had entered the house. Maybe the killer had already found a way inside. Or maybe some of the details were misunderstood later, repeated, and sharpened over time. What matters is that the family did not seem to experience the murders as something coming from nowhere. There were signs beforehand. Andreas noticed things. Something about the farm had become wrong. The date of the killings is usually given as March 31st, 1922. It was the end of March, but in rural Bavaria that still meant cold weather, dark evenings, and the remains of winter. The farm would have been quiet at night. There were no modern lights, no phone in the house, no easy way to call for help. Maria Baumgartner arrived that afternoon, escorted by her sister. Her sister stayed briefly and then took off. She was likely one of the last people to see the household alive. The usual reconstruction is that 4 members of the family were killed in the barn area: Andreas, his wife Cäzilia, Viktoria, and young Cäzilia too. They may have been drawn there one by one. That point is important, but it is still a reconstruction. No one survived to describe the sequence. What investigators had were the bodies, the location of the bodies, and the condition of the farm. There is also an important practical point. Investigators later concluded that the noises from the barn could not easily be heard from inside the living quarters. If that's right, then the victims may not have been drawn out simply by animals moving or making noise. They may have been called, confronted, or led there by a person. At some point, the killer used a rutawa, often described in English as a mattock or a grubbing hoe. It was a farm tool, the kind of object that belonged in that environment. Most of the victims were killed by heavy blows to the head. The elder Cäzilia, Andreas, Viktoria, and young Cäzilia were found in the barn area. Viktoria's injuries were especially severe, with repeated wounds to the head. The little girl, Cäzilia, appears to have survived for some time after the attack. That's a heartbreaking detail, it really is. Inside the living quarters, the killer murdered Maria Baumgartner and Josef. Maria was the new maid. Her first day at Hinterkaifeck became her last. Her injuries included heavy blows to the head and a deep wound later associated with the pointed end of the farm tool. Little Josef was only 2.5 years old. He was killed in the house, likely in or near his sleeping area. Those 2 deaths are one reason why robbery alone has never felt like a complete explanation. A thief might kill when surprised. A panicked robber might silence witnesses. But Hinterkaifeck looks more deliberate than that. The killer didn't simply strike once and run. He killed everybody on the property. Then he stayed. At least, that is what the evidence appears to suggest. After the murders, there were signs that someone had used the house and done at least enough around the animals to delay suspicions. Food in the house was eaten. The fireplace or oven appears to have been used. The farm did not immediately announce itself as a place where everyone was dead. This is one of the most disturbing parts of the case. It suggests that the killer had time, nerve, and either a practical reason or a psychological willingness to remain near the bodies. He may have been delaying discovery. He may have been searching for something. He may have known the farm well enough to feel safe. He may have been someone who could come and go without drawing attention. Or there may have been more than one person involved. No version explains everything neatly. At about 3 a.m. on April 1st, a farmer named Simon Reislander reportedly saw 2 figures near the edge of the forest, close to Hinterkaifeck. When they noticed him, they turned away so he could not see their faces. That sighting has never been fully explained. It may have been important, it may have been unrelated, but in a case where the killer may have remained at or near the farm, it is difficult to ignore. Later on April 1st, coffee sellers Hans and Edward Shirovsky came to Hinterkaifeck to take an order. No one answered. They walked around the yard and noticed an open gate to the machine room, but they left. Young Cäzilia did not appear at school. At first, that may not have seemed alarming enough by itself. After all, rural life had interruptions. Children missed school, families were busy, but the absence continued. Later that night, an artisan named Michael Plockel reportedly passed near Hinterkaifeck and saw smoke from the oven or chimney. He also said someone with a lantern appeared and blinded his view, causing him to move on. That report adds to the idea that someone may have been active on the property the day after the murders. On April 2nd, the Gruber family failed to attend Sunday worship. Victoria was connected to the church choir, so her absence would have been noticed. By April 4th, concern had grown. That morning, a mechanic named Albert Hofner came to the farm to repair an engine. He knocked and waited, but no one appeared. He later said he heard the dog inside the farm building, but no human voice. After waiting, he went ahead with the repair and worked there for several hours. This, to me, is extremely eerie. He wasn't investigating a crime scene or anything, he was just there doing his job. The farm seemed empty but not obviously dead, but there were bodies there, and he didn't know. The family dog, often described as a Spitz or a Spitz mix, was later found alive but injured around the farm buildings, possibly in or near the stable. That detail does matter because a watchful dog may have warned the family or drawn attention from visitors. At the very least, it suggests the attacker may have tried to deal with the animal before, during, or after the killings. Later that day, Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann and stepson Josef to check on the farm. They returned without making contact. Schlittenbauer then went himself, accompanied by Michael Pohl and Jakob Sigel. They found the bodies in the barn. Shortly afterward, they found Maria and Josef inside. The investigation began from a scene already disturbed by the people who discovered it. To no one's surprise, the crime scene was not secured in the way a modern investigation would secure it. Neighbors and onlookers moved through the property. People touched things. Bodies were moved. The ordinary human shock of discovery collided with the need for evidence preservation, and, therefore, evidence was lost. An investigative team from Munich was assigned to the case. Inspector Georg Reingruber led the investigation. Court physician Dr. Johann Baptist Aumler performed the autopsies on April 6 and April 7. They were carried out in the open courtyard of the farm, on a makeshift table rather than in a controlled medical setting. The image is stark: a rural crime scene, bodies brought out, and post-mortem examinations performed in public view because that was what the situation allowed. The victims' skulls were removed and sent to Munich for further examination. Later, they were lost, likely during the chaos of the Second World War. That loss matters because it removed any possibility of later forensic review. The murder weapon was also not recovered at the beginning. The implement believed to have been used in the killings was found later, hidden in a false floor space in the attic above the living quarters, when the farm was demolished in 1923. It suggests the killer either knew the structure of the house or had enough time inside to hide the weapon carefully. By then, the strongest physical evidence had already been passed through time, contamination, and mishandling. Investigators first considered robbery. That sort of made sense on the surface. Hinterkaifeck was isolated. The family was believed to have money. A farm with valuables and few neighbors would be an obvious target. But robbery never really fit the puzzle. Money was found in the house. Valuables were not taken in the way one would expect from a simple theft. The killer also had remained at or returned to the property after the murders, which is not typical of a thief trying to escape. The investigation moved through other possibilities: traveling criminals, local enemies, former workers, family connections, and even neighbors. The case produced many suspects, but one name has remained at the center: Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer was a nearby farmer. He reportedly had a relationship with Viktoria Gabriel after his first wife died. He may have believed, or been believed by others, to be Joseph's father. But the paternity question was tangled with the incest accusations surrounding Andreas and Viktoria. If Josef was Schlittenbauer's child, that gave him a direct connection to the household. It also created possible motives: money, paternity, marriage pressure, reputation, resentment, or fear of scandal. Schlittenbauer was also part of the group that discovered the bodies. His behavior that day became one of the reasons people suspected him. According to later accounts, he entered the house before the others were comfortable doing so. He knew where to move. He disturbed the scene. He reportedly said he was looking for Josef. If Josef was his son, that could explain why he went inside. It could also explain why people looked at him differently afterward. The missing key became part of the suspicion. According to later accounts, Schlittenbauer opened the front door with the same house key that had been missing before the murders. If that account is correct, it is one of the most suspicious details attached to him. Schlittenbauer also made comments in later years that some people interpreted as suspicious. One reported statement concerned the killer's inability to bury the bodies because the ground was frozen. To some, that sounded like knowledge only the killer would have. To others, it was a practical guess by a local farmer who knew the land and the weather. I tend to agree with it being a practical guess. I mean, everybody knows you can't dig in frozen ground. So, that's the evidence against him, if you can call it evidence at all. Suspicious, but not conclusive. Schlittenbauer was never convicted. He denied involvement. He sued people who accused him of being the murderer and won slander cases. Now, that doesn't make him innocent, but it does mean the case against him never became proof. Another suspect theory involved Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. Carl had been reported killed in the First World War, but some people later speculated that he had survived and returned. In that version, he came back to find his wife connected to scandal, perhaps with another man, and murdered the household. Now, this to me sounds like a true crime Reddit conspiracy theory. Apparently people have always been people. It is a dramatic theory, but yeah, weak. Men who served with Carl reportedly identified his body after his death in the war. There's no real evidence that he survived, returned to Bavaria, and killed the family. That theory survives mostly because it feels like a story. The dead husband returns from the war. The farm has secrets. The family is destroyed. But the evidence doesn't carry it very far. In fact, it doesn't carry it at all. There were also suspicions around the Bickler brothers, Anton and Karl, along with the former farmhand Georg Siegel. This line of suspicion came partly through Crescens Rieger, the Grubers' former maid. She had worked at Hinterkaifeck from late 1920 into 1921. She suspected Anton and Karl Bickler and possibly Siegel because they knew the farm and had made comments or behaved in ways she found troubling. Anton Bickler had helped with the potato harvest and knew the property. Rieger said he had spoken harshly about the Grubers. She also claimed that the family dog, which barked at many visitors, did not bark at Anton. Georg Siegel was suspected by some because he knew of the family's money and had, allegedly, stolen from the house before. These suspicions are worth mentioning, but they never became a solved case, of course. The Bickler theory was later weakened by questions of distance, timing, and employment. The same is true of the Gump brothers, Adolf and Anton. Their names entered the case later. Adolf Gump had connections to violent post-war circles, and decades after the murders, claims were made that the brothers may have been involved. Anton was questioned, but nothing was proven. By that point, the case had already become a magnet for late statements, old rumors, and family stories. Some of those may contain truth, others may be echoes of a famous crime moving through a region for decades. Other theories involved laborers, vagrants, or traveling criminals. This was not impossible. Post-war Germany had dislocation, poverty, and men moving through the countryside. An isolated farm could certainly draw the attention of a stranger. But a stranger theory has weaknesses. The crime suggests at least some familiarity with the property. The killer used or found a farm tool. He may have lured the victims into the barn by direct contact. He apparently stayed afterward or returned. He left money behind. The killings suggest more than a quick robbery. That does not rule out an outsider, but it makes a local or personally connected killer much more plausible. The motive remains uncertain. Money was possible, but incomplete. Revenge against Andreas was possible. He had enemies, or at least people who disliked him. His reputation was darkened by the incest conviction. A motive involving Viktoria was possible. Her relationship with Schlittenbauer, the question of Josef's paternity, and pressure around support or marriage could have all mattered. A motive involving shame or silence was possible. If someone feared exposure, or if some conflict had reached a breaking point, killing the household may have been an extreme attempt to end it. But every motive has the same problem. It has to explain why 6 people died. Not only Andreas, not only Viktoria, not only the adult members of the household. The killer killed a 7-year-old girl, a 2.5-year-old boy, and a maid who had just arrived. That points either to a killer determined to leave no witnesses, or to someone whose rage extended to the entire household. The myths around Hinterkaifeck come from the gaps. The footprints in the snow, the attic noises, the missing key, the newspaper, the former maid who thought the house was haunted, the animals being watered or quieted after the murders, the chimney smoke, the killer who may have stayed. Those details are part of the case, but they should be weighed differently from the bodies, the dates, the suspects, and the known investigation. The footprints and attic evidence suggest the possibility that someone had been on the property before the murders, but they don't prove exactly how long that person was there or whether the killer had been living inside the house continuously. The missing key suggests the killer may have had access, but it does not prove who took it. The animals being watered or quieted, food being eaten, and the oven or fireplace being used suggest post-murder activity, but they don't tell us exactly how long the killer stayed or whether he stayed without leaving. The former maid's fear gives the case a haunted quality, but what she feared may have been a human presence, strange noises, or the general atmosphere of the farm. The supernatural isn't necessarily needed here. The human version is disturbing enough. In 1923, the Hinterkaifeck farm was demolished. During the demolition, the murder weapon was found hidden in the false floor space in the attic above the living quarters. A penknife was also found, but it could not be clearly tied to the killer. The farm itself was removed from the landscape, but the case did not disappear. A memorial now stands near the former site. In 2007, students at a police academy in Fürstenfeldbruck reviewed the case using modern investigative methods. According to later reporting, they developed the likely suspect, but that name was not publicly released, partly out of consideration for living descendants. And in my opinion, that was the right move. Good job by that police academy. But that review has become another part of the story. It suggests that the case may have a most likely answer, but it does not make the case solved. No one was tried. No one confessed. The surviving evidence cannot produce certainty. Hinterkaifeck remains unresolved. The strongest suspect is still usually Schlittenbauer. He had the relationship to Viktoria, the possible connection to Josef, proximity to the farm, knowledge of the area, and behavior after discovery that raised suspicion. But the case against him remains weakly circumstantial in my opinion. Carl Gabriel is possible only if one accepts a bizarre survival theory after the war. The Bickler-Siegel line has local knowledge but really lacks proof. The Gump brothers depend heavily on later claims. A stranger theory explains the unknown killer but struggles with the personal nature of the crime and the post-murder behavior. Each theory explains kind of part of the case, but none explains all of it. All we really have is a timeline. In the weeks and days before March 31st, the Gruber household notices strange signs around the farm. Tracks, noises, a missing key, and an unfamiliar newspaper. On March 31st, 1922, Maria Baumgartner arrives to begin work as the new maid. That night, the entire household is murdered. 4 victims are found in the barn: Andreas Gruber, Cäzilia Gruber, Viktoria Gabriel, and young Cäzilia Gabriel. Maria Baumgartner and Viktoria's 2-year-old son, Josef, were killed inside the living quarters. On April 1st, people come near the farm without realizing what has happened, and Michael Plockel later reports smoke and a light near the property. On the 2nd of April, the family misses church. On April 4th, neighbors finally discover the bodies. The investigation begins, but the scene has already been disturbed. The autopsies are performed on the 6th and 7th of April in the farm courtyard. The murder weapon is not found until later, hidden in a false floor space in the attic above the living quarters. The farm is demolished in 1923. No one is convicted. That really is the case. A remote farm, a very troubled household, a killing that seems both planned and chaotic, and a suspect list that never turns into a verdict. Hinterkaifeck is often remembered for the eerier details: the footprints, the attic, the smoke, and the killer staying behind. But this is not just a spooky story. The center is worse and grisly. 6 people, including 2 children, were killed in a place where they should have been safe. The investigation never recovered enough of the truth, and whoever did it walked away with his name still missing from the record. Thank you very, very much for listening. I really do appreciate you, and I will see you again soon. Take care, and take care of yourselves. Much love.